Are you tired of not knowing what order to play the Like a Dragon games in? Are you confused by people recommending various different starting points? Don't know if you want to play it chronologically or in release order? Do you want the best way to get into this series? Then I got you. This video will provide the objectively best way to play the Yakuza games and best way to experience all the events chronologically. Note, this video is purely educational and made for entertainment. This is not a pure timeline, and some events may be missing. I'm just going to be talking about the mainline games here, so no spin-offs like Judgment will be included. The first game you're going to want to start with is actually the most obvious choice, Infinite Wealth. This is because Infinite Wealth actually has the earliest occurring events in the timeline, not including these two games here. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, you're gonna have to own all of the mainline games before you actually start playing. This is for the best experience, of course. Anyways, for Infinite Wealth, you're gonna wanna watch the opening cutscene where Bryce Dallas Howard does some bad things. And then you can close the game and boot up Yakuza 7. You'll do something similar here. Watch the opening cutscene of Yakuza 7, but after it's finished, you'll run into a problem. For the best experience, you wanna watch what's coming up next, right? But the problem is, Yakuza 7 shows the next events chronologically later on in the game. You're somehow gonna get to these parts of Yakuza 7 that take place 7 years later without seeing the rest of the game. Once you get to that point, there are a lot of cutscenes that you gotta watch, so have fun with that. And once you're finished with all of these cutscenes, you have to close the game and actually turn Infinite Wealth back on. You have to go back and forth because Infinite Wealth actually continues on something that happens in Yakuza 7, but it's not shown until Infinite Wealth. Now that we're all caught up in 1977, obviously, you're going to want to boot up Yakuza 2 or Kiwami 2. I'm going to use Kiwami 2 because that's what I have installed right now. We're going to have the same problem that we had with Yakuza 7. There are flashbacks to an earlier point, but they don't get shown to you until later on in the game. So somehow you're gonna have to watch all of these flashbacks before you see the rest of the game. After watching everything from 1980 play out, you're gonna have to then watch this guy, this woman, and this baby, and then you're done. Naturally, after these scenes, we're gonna move on to the next game, the game that everyone recommends you play first, Yakuza 4. But only the Saejima 1985 scenes. You're somehow gonna have to avoid all of Akiyama's section, and also somehow get access to the later parts of the game, where the events of 1985 are actually shown from a different perspective. But trust me, it is worth it. This is how you're going to experience everything. You can't really experience the 1985 sections of Saejima's part without the whole story, right? It's not really good to have a fragmented story where flashbacks are explaining everything that's happening in a certain time period. It's very tacky. We can now move on to the next game, Yakuza 0. This game has flashbacks to 1985, but mostly takes place in 1988. It actually has some scenes that take place right after Saejima's section in Yakuza 4, which you just played. But they aren't actually shown to you until later on in the game, so you're somehow gonna have to get access to them before you play the rest of the game. There's also a flashback in Chapter 1 to 1985, and somehow you're gonna have to watch that before you actually get to it. You have to watch all of the 1985 sections, and once you're done with that, you have to boot up Infinite Wealth again, and then watch this 30-second flashback that takes place in 1987. Once you're done with that, then you can actually play Yakuza 0 with no problems, because that game takes place in 1988. You can really take your time with 0 and enjoy it. It's probably one of the best in the series, and it really captures the bubble era perfectly. It'll have you wanting more by the time you're actually done with it, but unfortunately, the next game you have to play isn't the sequel. It's actually Yakuza 7. This is because Yakuza 7 has some flashbacks that take place in 1992. This is right after Yakuza 0, but before 1 or Kiwami 1's prologue. After you're done watching all of these Ichiban scenes, you can move on to 1 or Kiwami 1. I'm just gonna go with Yakuza 1, cause that's what I have installed right now. There's a flashback in Yakuza 1 that takes place in 1993, so you're somehow gonna have to watch that before you play the rest of the prologue, which takes place in 1995. After watching this cutscene, you can play through all of the prologue of Yakuza 1 without any problems. After the prologue, you're somehow gonna have to watch these cutscenes that take place in 1996 that are shown later in Yakuza 1. And there's a bunch of them, like a lot. and they're not actually revealed to you until later in the game. But we're all gonna watch them here because experiencing things chronologically is way better. Next up, the greatest and grandest Yakuza game, Yakuza 5. The greatest character in the entire franchise, Shinada, has flashbacks in 1997. But you actually don't get to play as Shinada until the second to last part of the game, so good luck with somehow trying to make that happen. There's also some jumping around in his part. You're gonna have to somehow watch flashbacks that are shown to you later that expand on what happened in earlier flashbacks. This right here is RGG's ultimate technique, a flashback, but you don't show the full context until later where there's another flashback to that flashback. It makes it a little bit hard to play these games chronologically, but it's what you're gonna have to do to experience them to their fullest. After all that, you can close your game because it's back to Yakuza 7. We're getting to the good part now, trust me. From here on out, it's smooth. The reason we're going back to Yakuza 7 is because the first chapter of that game takes place on December 31st, 2000, which is 5 years after Yakuza 1's prologue and 5 years before the main events of it. You can play through the first chapter of Yakuza 7 with almost no problems. Except, since this is a Yakuza game, there's a flashback later that you have to somehow watch. And we need that flashback, just like all the other flashbacks, to have the full context of a scene before moving on. We're not going to be playing in 2019, getting flashbacks from 2001, alright? That sucks. Once you're all said and done with this prologue of Yakuza 7, you can finally move on to Yakuza 1. Trust me, this time, it's straightforward. This time, you're not going to have to go to any other game. All you have to do is not play the game, and instead, somehow watch this cutscene of Haruka at Sunflower that takes place before the events of that game. Alright, that's enough of that bit. There are just too many moments in these games that involve jumping from one point in time to another point in time to give context to that other point in time with this point of time, because RGG loves withholding information and telling you things later. You'll have a flashback explaining the backstory of a character, only to have another flashback to that flashback later on, explaining what happened. It's so hard to try and put everything together to play in this really straight line. So you know what? Who cares? There's not really a definitive or right way to start the series. There's too many games, and since everyone is different, everyone's going to experience these games differently or want something from these games that other people don't want. If you really want a starting point, I think there are 4 games that could be a starting point. You'll play the original Yakuza if you want to go through release order, or if you just really like the PS2 feel of the games. You'll play this game if you want to experience everything chronologically. You'll play this game if you're a weirdo. And you'll play this game if you want to experience an RPG or play Ichiban story first. I think you should just play the game that you think is gonna make you like the series. A lot of people saw the memes of Yakuza 0 and they went, hey, this looks interesting, let's play it. The memes made people think they were gonna love the game, and in the end, they did love the game. The same can be said for Yakuza 7, even freaking Dead Souls. Some people start with that game and they like the characters so much they end up liking the whole series. There is no definitive way to start. Sure, some options are bad, but nothing is ever perfect. That's it. Bye.